On May 26, 2024, an Israeli airstrike hit Tal al-Sultan in Rafah, and Gaza health authorities reported that at least 45 people were killed in the strike and ensuing fire. The widely shared "All Eyes on Rafah" graphic that followed made distant attention immediate, but it also exposed a harder fact. An image can make suffering visible without telling us what political judgment, if any, follows from seeing it. The graphic circulated widely across social media platforms, especially through Instagram stories. It was strikingly simple, a stylized AI-generated image, a phrase that directed attention toward Rafah, an invitation to witness, and also an invitation to share. Its force came partly from speed. A viewer did not need to know the geography of Tal al-Sultan, the circumstances of the strike, or the history surrounding Rafah, in order to recognize that the image concerned an emergency. That is not nothing. Attention matters. A catastrophe ignored is not made less real by its invisibility, but invisibility can make public response harder still. The graphic made a demand on viewers: do not look away. Susan Sontag's question begins exactly there. In Regarding the Pain of Others, published in 2003, she argues that images of suffering can command attention without, by themselves, producing political understanding. They can show that something terrible has happened. They can make a distant event emotionally near. They can fix a scene in memory. Yet none of this means that the image has supplied an account of what happened, who acted, what structures made the event possible, or what an adequate response should be. The All Eyes on Rafah image sharpens this problem because it was not a documentary photograph of the May 2024 strike. It did not claim to show the particular visible aftermath of Tal al-Sultan. It worked differently. It was a shareable visual signal. Its purpose was to focus global attention on Rafah, not to serve as a record of one scene at one moment. That difference matters, though it does not settle the issue. A documentary photograph can also be incomplete. It can show a wounded body, a destroyed building, or a grieving family, while leaving the viewer without the political and historical knowledge needed to understand the event. The AI graphic may be even further from the event it invokes, but Sontag's concern is broader than the distinction between authentic and artificial images. Her concern is the temptation to treat any powerful image as if it had already done the work of judgment. There is an obvious resistance to this argument. If images make people care, why demand more from them? Why risk turning a simple moral response into an excuse for distance or hesitation? The strongest objection will arrive later in the work of David Campbell, who challenges the familiar story that repeated images of atrocity inevitably wear compassion away. But Sontag's argument did not begin with social media or generative AI. It emerged from an older argument about war photography, public feeling, and the belief that seeing violence could create a shared moral clarity. Regarding the Pain of Others appeared in 2003, during the opening months of the invasion of Iraq. The timing gave its question a particular urgency. War was not only being fought, it was being represented, circulated, framed, and argued over through images. Sontag returned to a writer who had considered a related problem decades earlier, Virginia Woolf. In 3 Guineas, published in 1938, Woolf considers photographs of violence from the Spanish Civil War. Her concern is not merely whether such photographs are horrifying. They are. The harder question is what horror does in political argument. Can images of the wounded and the dead bring people into common opposition to war? Or do viewers see them from positions so different that no simple unity follows? Sontag closely engages Woolf because Woolf refuses an easy sentimental answer. A photograph of suffering may seem to address humanity as a whole. It may appear to say that anyone with ordinary moral feeling must respond in the same way. But Woolf connects the photographs from Spain to arguments about militarism and patriarchy. The images do not stand alone. They become meaningful within an argument about institutions, power, and the forms of social life that sustain violence. Sontag had already examined photography's effects in On Photography, published in 1977. By 2003, she was revisiting the issue under the pressure of organized violence. She rejects two opposite simplifications. The first says atrocity photographs automatically unite all decent viewers. The second says that repeated exposure automatically deadens viewers, making them passive and indifferent. Both stories are reassuring in their own way. The first tells us that feeling horror is nearly the same as understanding. The second tells us that if we fail to act, the explanation lies in images themselves, which have supposedly exhausted our capacity to care. Sontag resists both. Viewers are not identical. Their prior knowledge differs. Their political positions differ. The contexts in which they encounter an image differ, and therefore the meaning they give it can differ as well. This is where the argument becomes more demanding. The issue is not whether an image is emotionally powerful. The issue is whether emotional power can carry the full burden of political explanation and moral obligation. To answer that, we need to look at what a photograph actually gives us, and what it necessarily leaves outside its frame. A photograph fixes a particular place, time, angle, and visible subject. It gives us this person, this body, this building, this expression, this fragment of an event. Its specificity is part of its force. A photograph does not merely tell us that violence exists in the abstract. It confronts us with an instance. But a war is not an instance. Organized violence has causes, agents, institutions, sequences, and consequences. It has histories before the shutter opens and effects after the image is taken. A photograph may record devastation, but it cannot independently explain the chain of decisions, political conditions, and relationships of power that produced what is visible. Sontag therefore treats photographs as partial records rather than self-explanatory moral lessons. Partial does not mean useless, it means bounded. The frame includes some things and excludes others. It may show the result of violence without showing the people who caused it. It may show victims without clarifying the political situation in which they became victims. It may show a moment of destruction while leaving invisible what came before and what will follow. Moral judgment needs more than an object of feeling. It needs an account. If we are to decide what ought to be done, we need to know what has occurred, who bears responsibility, what claims are being made, and what possible responses would actually address the situation. An image can provoke moral attention. It can make indifference harder, but it cannot independently determine a responsible political response. This is not a cold argument against feeling. It is an argument against confusing feeling with comprehension. A person can be genuinely shaken by an image and still misunderstand the conflict it depicts. Indeed, the intensity of the feeling may make the mistake more likely, because vividness can create the impression that nothing further needs to be known. The next problem is the spectator's role. Not whether looking is wrong, but why viewers so often want a vivid image to become a complete account of victims, war, and obligation. Sontag's central target is not looking itself. She does not argue that images of suffering should be hidden, avoided, or treated as inherently corrupting. Her target is a wish that can arise in the spectator, the wish to believe that seeing clearly is the same as knowing fully. Being affected by an image is not the same as understanding the conflict it depicts. This distinction is central to regarding the pain of others. An image may make grief, outrage, pity, or horror immediate, but those responses do not tell us, by themselves, how the event should be interpreted. They do not tell us which political account is adequate. They do not tell us what obligations belong to a particular viewer. Captions matter here. Circulation matters. Prior knowledge matters. The same photograph can acquire different meanings depending on how it is described, where it appears, and what viewers already believe about the conflict. A caption may identify a place, name an event, or place an image inside one account rather than another. Circulation can turn an image into evidence, symbol, warning, accusation, or spectacle. Prior knowledge can make an image legible in one way and nearly opaque in another. Woolf's treatment of photographs from Spain had already made this point in a different register. She did not separate the images from her arguments about militarism and patriarchy. The photographs did not generate their political meaning unaided. They entered an analysis. Sontag follows that insight while resisting the assumption that viewers stand on shared political ground. Not everyone sees an image from the same position. Some may have direct knowledge of a conflict. Some may encounter it amid competing accounts. Some may see it as confirmation of what they already think. Some may see it without enough context to know what precisely they are being asked to recognize. The image does not erase these differences. This is why the demand to look can be morally serious and politically insufficient at the same time. Looking can be a refusal of denial. It can register that suffering is real. Yet a viewer who stops there may turn the image into a substitute for the more difficult work of interpretation. Still, Sontag's suspicion of easy visual politics can sound too pessimistic. If images can move people to care and act, perhaps concern about desensitization and empty spectatorship gives too much power to the medium and too little to viewers. David Campbell presses that objection directly. In The Myth of Compassion Fatigue, published in 2012, Campbell argues that claims of inevitable viewer desensitization to atrocity photographs are often asserted more strongly than the evidence permits. The crude story is familiar. People see too many images of suffering, become numb, and cease to care. Campbell argues that this conclusion should not be treated as established simply because it is repeated. This is an important correction. It rejects the idea that exposure to suffering automatically produces indifference. Viewers may remain responsive. Images may sustain attention rather than exhaust it. They may help make distant suffering publicly present. A theory that assumes inevitable numbness risks becoming its own excuse for disengagement. Martha Nussbaum provides a related reason not to dismiss emotion. In Upheavals of Thought, published in 2001, she argues that emotions can contain evaluative judgments rather than merely irrational impulses. Feeling grief, fear, anger, or compassion is not necessarily a departure from thought. Emotion can involve an appraisal of what matters. Together, these points challenge a crude saturation theory. It is too simple to say that an abundance of atrocity images produces only fatigue. It is also too simple to treat emotional response as politically empty by definition. Feeling can be intelligent, attention can endure. But Campbell's objection does not undo Sontag's deeper concern. Even if viewers do not become numb, attention without context can remain politically empty. A person may care intensely and still lack an adequate understanding of the violence they are seeing. Emotion may contain judgment, as Nussbaum argues, but it does not remove the need to ask whether that judgment is informed, directed, and connected to the actual conditions of a conflict. The real alternative is not feeling or knowledge. It is feeling without interpretation, or feeling joined to interpretation. Campbell helps us avoid fatalism about viewers. Sontag prevents optimism about images from becoming complacent. The Rafah graphic tests this distinction under conditions Sontag did not face. An image can now circulate globally at extraordinary speed, even when it is not a documentary record of the event that made it urgent. Generative AI systems can produce photorealistic and stylized images from text prompts. The All Eyes on Rafah graphic was a stylized example of this wider condition. It was not a documentary photograph of the May 2024 al-Sultan strike. Yet it became a major vehicle for attention, particularly through Instagram stories. Its circulation demonstrates a real capacity for rapid mobilization. A phrase and image could travel across platforms, directing viewers toward Rafah at a moment when reports of the strike and ensuing fire were reaching a global public. It could make a place present in the consciousness of people far away. In that limited but important sense, the graphic did something images have often done. It made attention easier to organize, but it also made other work harder. Because the image was not a documentary record, it could not show what happened at al-Sultan. It could not establish the details of the strike. It could not reveal the visible circumstances of the ensuing fire. The graphic asked viewers to attend, but it could not itself verify what they were attending to. This does not make the graphic worthless or deceptive merely because it was AI generated. Its status was different. It functioned as a symbol of attention rather than as a photographic document. The problem begins when that difference disappears, when visual force is mistaken for evidentiary force, or when the act of sharing begins to feel like the completion of political responsibility. Sontag's questions remain exact. Who produced this image? What does it exclude? And what history surrounds it? In the case of a documentary photograph, those questions concern the maker, the angle, the caption, the conditions of circulation, and the history outside the frame. In the case of an AI-generated graphic, the questions become even more pressing. What is this image asking us to feel? What does its stylization make visible? What does it leave unshown? How does its speed alter the relation between attention and understanding? The modern stake is not whether images should move us. They will. Nor is it whether global attention is preferable to silence. It often is. The stake is whether an image that successfully mobilizes attention can also encourage the slower practices that attention requires: verification, framing, and sustained witness. The open question is concrete. When an AI image sends millions of viewers toward a real place of suffering, what would it take for that attention to become understanding rather than merely circulation? Subscribe for more philosophical investigations.